The disciples of Jesus are some of the most important figures in Christianity. But what happened to them after the Bible? It is said that they travelled across the Mediterranean and beyond, establishing the very first churches in Christian history. But then it takes a darker turn. According to legend, only one of them survived into old age. The other 11 met gruesome and horrendous fates. Their stories have been immortalized by generations of artists. In this video, let's explore the history of the 12 disciples and what happened to them after the Bible. Before we explore the 12 disciples on our list, we need to ask an important question. What exactly is a disciple? Throughout the New Testament Gospels, the Bible lists 12 men who accompanied Jesus during his 3-year ministry. Today, we know them simply as the disciples, a word that comes from the Latin discipulus, meaning student. But in reality, these men were not simply there to learn. They lived and ate alongside their master, and many were given positions of authority. Perhaps a better way to view them is as apprentices, which is closer in meaning to the original Greek term, mathetes. So what do we actually know about these disciples after Jesus? Well, not much. With the exception of the Acts of the Apostles, the Bible tells us very little about what happened next, although it's widely believed that the disciples travelled across the Mediterranean and beyond, and founded some of the earliest Christian churches in the world. In the centuries that followed, rumours began to spread of the disciples' various adventures. Curiously, however, it seems that the disciples' stories all ended in tragedy. With the sole exception of one of them, they are all said to have met disturbing and gruesome ends. And with that cheery note, let's begin our journey into the disciples. Peter. Of all the disciples, Peter is considered to be one of, if not the most important of the 12. In fact, he may be one of the most important figures in Christianity and was a key part in transforming a fringe Jewish sect into the religion we know today. He has to be one of the most studied figures in history. But what do we really know about him? Who was the real Saint Peter? Well, let's start with the name and how it wasn't actually Peter. Originally, he was known as Simon. According to the Gospels, he worked as a fisherman on the Sea of Galilee with his brother, Andrew. And in these stories, he was approached by Jesus to follow him and famously called to become a, quote, fisher of men. From there, Simon appears to have emerged as a leader among the disciples and always is placed first among them. Over time, he comes to recognize Jesus as the promised Jewish Messiah, and so Jesus gives him the name Petros, the Greek word for rock, from which we actually get the name Peter. It leads to one of the most famous lines in the Bible, when Jesus says, quote, "You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." For the language nerds out there, it's a bit of a pun, and probably funnier in the original Greek. This line is often seen as establishing Peter's authority for generations of Christians to come. Historically speaking, Jesus and his disciples likely spoke Aramaic, and so Peter was likely called Kephas, which is the Aramaic word for rock. Interestingly, the name Kephas is referenced to in the writings of Paul, some of the earliest New Testament documents. This independent mention suggests that Peter was likely a real historical figure and active in the early Christian church. Despite his leadership status among the 12 disciples, Peter is not without his flaws. According to the Gospels, he was prone to outbursts, like the time he sliced off the ear of a soldier during the arrest of Jesus. Later in the tale, Peter fails Jesus in his hour of need, when he denies knowing him 3 times during his trial, an act heralded by the crowing of a rooster. Yet, despite his various misgivings, Peter is one of the first disciples to witness Jesus' return and is later forgiven and reinstated by his master. After Jesus' departure, Peter emerges as the leader of the first Christian community, which is centered in Jerusalem. But the followers of Jesus still had their enemies, and soon Peter is captured and imprisoned by King Herod Agrippa Fortunately, his jail time does not last long, as an angel breaks in and sets him free. From there, it appeared that Peter travelled north to the city of Antioch and established another church. But it is while he is there when he encounters a new problem entirely. According to the Acts of the Apostles, Peter meets the Roman centurion Cornelius, who wants to be baptized. This presents a problem. Under Jewish law, all members of God's covenant had to be circumcised, a requirement since the days of Abraham. But did this apply to Cornelius, a non-Jew? Peter sets aside the Jewish law and chooses to baptize him anyway. While this decision sparked controversy for some, it also marked a subtle turning point in Christian history. Was this movement part of the wider Jewish faith, or was it something else entirely? At this point, what happens later in Peter's life is less well known, although, according to the next generation of Christian writers, Peter spent his final days in one city, the capital of the empire, Rome. By the 1st century AD, Rome was a vast metropolis with around 1 million inhabitants. It was the home to soldiers, senators, and emperors, as well as thousands of poor and enslaved people. And it was here, among those disenfranchised masses, where Christianity began to spread rapidly. A distinct Christian population began to grow in the city, and its increasing presence began to worry the Roman elites. The historian Tacitus records that Christians in the city were loathed for their, quote, hatred of the human race, and that sporadic violence against them was often welcomed. This came to a head in July of 64 AD, when Rome was severely damaged by a fire. The Emperor Nero hastily blamed the Christians and ordered for their widespread persecution. And, if the rumours are to be believed, one of the victims was the Apostle Peter. According to the early histories, the saint had presided as the city's first Christian bishop. Now a man in his 60s, his years of running had finally caught up with him. After the Great Fire of Rome, Nero's soldiers captured him. For his alleged crimes, Peter was crucified upside down. It's a scene captured in one of art history's most iconic paintings, The Crucifixion of St. Peter by Caravaggio, where men are preparing the saint's cross. The aged St. Peter seems composed and ready to accept his fate. These stories have existed since around the 2nd century, and it was during this time that a small church was established at the rumoured place of the saint's death. This church became a Christian centre, and its influence spread across the Mediterranean. Rome's powerful line of bishops began to be called Papa or Pope, and could trace their line of succession back to Peter, the rock of the church. Today, the great symbol of the Catholic Church is St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican City, and it is here, buried beneath the marbled floor of this holy site, that the relics of this Christian saint are rumoured to be buried. During the life of St. Peter, we can see how a small Jewish sect grew into a network of churches across the Mediterranean, laying the foundations of the global religion it is today. St. Peter today is seen as the greatest disciple, and certainly Jesus' closest follower. This stands in contrast to this next figure, Judas. Judas Iscariot is by far the most infamous disciple on this list. He was the man who betrayed Jesus, famously handing him over for 30 pieces of silver. He remains the most controversial figure in all of Christianity. But who was Judas, and why did he betray Jesus? The disciple Judas appears in the original list of the 12 disciples. He is often known by his full name, Judas Iscariot. Iscariot is a rather strange surname, and is actually thought to be a Greek mistranslation of the Aramaic phrase Ish Kerioth, or the man from Kerioth, which is a town in southern Judea. If so, Judas would have been an outsider in the group, being the only disciple who was not originally from Galilee. Initially, Judas seems to play a minor role among the disciples, but does feature in one rather telling incident. In John's Gospel, Judas complains when Jesus has his feet washed with expensive perfume and argues that the money would be better spent on the poor. While it may seem like a good point, the Bible adds that Judas's concern is not about those in need. Instead, he wanted to take the money for himself. But if Judas was so untrustworthy, why was he even one of the 12 disciples? It's a mystery in the original story, but there are a few passages that seems to suggest that Jesus already knew his fate and somehow understood that Judas was to play a role. In fact, Jesus seems to already know when Judas betrayed him, most famously at the Last Supper, when he outs Judas as a traitor, saying, quote, "What you are about to do, do so quickly." And with that, Judas slinks away to receive his payment from the chief priests and elders. Curiously, the Bible offers two different motivations for why Judas chose to betray Jesus. In Matthew and Mark's Gospel, it's rather simple. Judas is motivated by greed. But in Luke and John's Gospel, Judas is under the possession of Satan himself. Whatever Judas's motivation truly was, while Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane, a group of soldiers ambush him. They are led by Judas, who identifies him with a kiss, an act forever immortalized by another of Caravaggio's haunting masterpieces. According to Matthew's Gospel, Judas was overcome with remorse and even tried to give back the blood money. Rejected and filled with guilt, Judas went off to a nearby field and ended things. Today, this field is known as Akeldama, or the Field of Blood. For centuries, Judas has been seen as an irredeemable figure of evil, a corrupted man who betrayed the Son of God for 30 pieces of silver. In Christian mythology, Judas famously appears in Dante's Inferno, where he resides in the ninth circle of hell. There he remains in a great icy chasm, being chewed in the mouth of Satan for eternity. And while this is the most common view of Judas, there are other texts out there that paint a very different picture. One of these is the Gospel of Judas, a late Christian text discovered in Egypt that seems to depict Judas as Jesus' favorite disciple, who is told to betray him in order to fulfill a cosmic plan. It's a really fascinating text, and if you want to learn more, I made a full audiobook of this gospel on my Patreon. So that's the story of Judas. Malevolent or misunderstood? I'll let you decide. Thomas. Of all the 12 disciples, I think that Thomas is the most underrated, especially as he may have travelled further than any other person on this list. While Thomas remained a loyal disciple throughout Jesus' ministry, the untimely death of his leader would have undoubtedly a major impact. And when reports came that Jesus had somehow returned, Thomas remained unconvinced. Despite eyewitness testimony from Peter, Thomas declared that the only way he would believe such a thing was if he could actually see Jesus face to face and touch the very wounds of the crucifixion. While doubting Thomas is now a byword for somebody who is overly skeptical, the art of necromancy is not something that happens every day. Then again, unless you were a disciple and witnessed the resurrection of Lazarus firsthand, then it's every other day. Anyway, a week goes by, and Jesus returns to the disciples, proving to Thomas that he has indeed risen from the dead. Once again, it is Caravaggio's painting, The Incredulity of St. Thomas, that captures this scene best. Jesus guides Thomas's hand gently into his wound to touch the mark left by the spear. It is at this point that Thomas confesses his faith. After this story in John's Gospel, Thomas fades away from the narrative, and the disciple is not mentioned again in the New Testament. But in the years to come, stories of where he went next would begin to emerge. And if they are to be believed, he went further than any other disciple. You see, in the southern Indian state of Kerala, you will find the St. Thomas Christians, an ancient church that claims to trace its lineage back to the disciple himself. According to local legends, Thomas left the Holy Land and sailed down along the spice routes of the Indian Ocean. Landing on the tropical Malabar coast, he preached to the local Hindu Brahmins and even gained some local converts. Of course, it would not take long for this strange visitor to attract unwanted attention. While preaching, he was set upon by a clan of warriors, one of whom ran a spear through his side, in the very same place as his former master. His relics were then said to be preserved by locals, his holy shrine becoming a site of pilgrimage. Today, these remains are said to be housed in St. Thomas's Cathedral in Chennai, India, which was first built by Portuguese explorers over the site of the original tomb. Even the spear that supposedly killed him is on display. From doubting disciple to one of Jesus' most dedicated apostles, the legends of St. Thomas's travels are actually attested by early Christian histories. While this trip to India might seem far-fetched, these spice routes were well known in the Roman period, and the St. Thomas Christians are indeed an ancient church, one that still thrives to this day. Andrew, Scotland, the home of Robert Burns, Scotch whisky, and the Highland Games. You may recognise its national flag, the Saltire, but once I've explained how it relates to St. Andrew, you might not look at it in the same way ever again. But let's start, as we have done, with the story in the Bible. According to the Synoptic Gospels, Andrew was originally a fisherman and was called to follow Jesus by the Sea of Galilee. This association has stuck with him in Christian art, where he is often depicted as carrying a large net. Throughout the New Testament, St. Andrew is one of the most important of the 12 disciples, and one of the few to witness Jesus' strangest discourse, which outlines the various signs of the apocalypse. Atop the Mount of Olives, Jesus tells Andrew and the others that one day, corrupt prophets will emerge and falsely claim to be the Messiah. Soon, violence will erupt all over the earth, leading to the persecution of Christians and the apostasy of many others. The discourse on the Mount of Olives is one of the most interesting sections of the Gospels, especially for biblical historians. Many believe that it reflects a genuine strand of Jesus' original teachings and possibly reveals the apocalyptic anxieties of the early Christian communities. Like many on this list, the New Testament texts don't say anything about the fate of Andrew. It was left to early Christian scholars and thinkers to fill in the gaps based on rumours that they had heard. According to early histories, Andrew left the Holy Land for a region called Scythia, which loosely refers to the steppes to the north of the Black Sea. Later medieval writers considered Andrew as an early apostle to the Slavs, who apparently foretold that the city of Kiev would become a cradle of Orthodox Christianity. After his travels in Scythia, Andrew returned south to set up a church in the Greek city of Patras. But in the year 60 AD, Andrew was captured by guards and sentenced to be crucified, but this time on a cross in the shape of an X. After his excruciating death, Andrew's holy relics were sent to various churches, and it's long been rumoured that some of them were taken to Scotland. Although the veracity of these claims is debated, in the centuries to come, a small monastic community developed in the coastal region of Fife. Today, that site is the University of St. Andrews, one of the oldest universities in Europe. At its centre stands the ruins of a once great cathedral, which allegedly housed the remains of this Christian saint. Although during the Protestant Reformation, the building was destroyed. Due to his connection to Scotland, St. Andrew has long been seen as the patron saint of the country, and the national flag, the Saltire, bears homage to his rather brutal execution method. The St. Andrew's Cross was later used to form part of the Union flag of the United Kingdom. Shame we still can't fit in the Welsh dragon though. John. The problem with being called John is that everyone is called John. From John the Baptist to John of Patmos, the Bible is full of Johns. And so we get to this disciple, known as John the Evangelist, one of Jesus' closest followers. Traditionally, he is linked to the Gospel of John, where he is often identified as the mysterious author, known simply as the disciple whom Jesus loved. Seeing as John's Gospel was written between 90 AD to 100 AD, he must have been very old when it was written, if indeed the author was the same figure. That's why, in Christian art, John is easily recognizable as being the youngest of the group. After the events in the Bible, John is said to have traveled across the eastern Mediterranean, and according to the apocryphal Acts of John, this apostle was even said to perform miracles, like the time he raised a woman from the dead. Although this text was deemed heretical, illustrations of this apocryphal story somehow made it into medieval Christian art. But there's one other reason why John is so significant on this list. You see, he was the only one that didn't die a horrendous death. After his travels, John is believed to have settled in Ephesus, where he established a Christian school and died peacefully of natural causes in 98 AD. His relics were stored in a great basilica whose ruins you can still visit to this day. The city of Ephesus became an important center of Christian learning. One of its most famous theologians was Irenaeus of Lyon, a fierce opponent of the Gnostic Gospels, whom we met in my video on the subject. Irenaeus was taught by a man called Polycarp, who had himself allegedly been taught by the Apostle John. As a result, Irenaeus was seen as an important Christian leader. After all, he had an education unlike any of his time. In any case, the original disciple John was the last surviving member of Jesus' original ministry, having outlived the other 11 disciples. James the Greater. Like his brother John, there are several people also called James in the New Testament, including another disciple on this very list. But this James is nicknamed James the Greater, and he certainly earns his reputation. According to the Gospels, James was a close disciple of Jesus, but had a reputation for being a firebrand. In one story, James and John visit a Samaritan village that is not overly welcoming. Insulted, James asks Jesus, "Lord, do you want us to call fire down from heaven to destroy them?" Naturally, Jesus declines this request. Due to his eager, perhaps impulsive personality, Jesus calls James and his brother Boanerges, a very curious word that doesn't have a direct meaning. Many scholars believe it could be a corrupted translation of the Aramaic word B'nai Regaz, meaning sons of thunder. Aside from this story, James is also one of the disciples whose death is recorded in the Bible. In the Acts of the Apostles, we learn that he is executed by King Herod's soldiers, and so sadly holds the record for being the first of the disciples to be martyred. Although he suffered a rather early demise, James packed quite a lot into his life. You see, there are many apocryphal stories that were written about him, especially from Spain. According to medieval Spanish chroniclers, St. James briefly travelled to the west before he was martyred. He arrived at the Roman province of Hispania, and according to one famous story, he witnessed a vision of the Virgin Mary standing upon a pillar, who requested that he build the church in her honour. While the apparition disappeared, the holy pillar stayed behind and still resides in the Cathedral Basilica of Our Lady of the Pillar at Zaragoza. Shortly afterward, he returned to Jerusalem to be martyred. But those faithful to him brought James's relics back to Spain and apparently hid them in the northwestern region of Galicia. Today, it is the site of a great cathedral, Santiago de Compostela, one of the most important pilgrimage sites in all of Europe. Every year, thousands of visitors come to pray at the tomb of the apostle, as they have done for centuries. As the patron saint of Spain, St. James, or Santiago, features heavily in the myths of the nation. During the medieval era, St. James was the symbol of the Spanish people, especially during the Reconquista, when Muslim rulers were driven out of the peninsula. In fact, during one battle, St. James was said to have miraculously appeared, riding atop a white horse, and came to the aid of the Spanish Christians. This image of St. James as a crusader later became a symbol used in the Spanish conquest of the Americas. Church artworks found in Peru often depict him as a conquistador, trampling indigenous warriors beneath his horse. Of course, it's a complicated legacy, but I suppose it's rather fitting for an apostle called the Son of Thunder. Philip. Philip is one of those disciples who is often overlooked, but he has a fascinating history nonetheless. Although he is a minor figure in the Gospels, Philip's real moment of fame comes during the story of the feeding of the 5,000, one of the only miracles recorded in all 4 Gospels. According to the legend, Jesus sees a great crowd coming towards him. He decides to test Philip and innocently asks him where to buy all the bread for these hungry people. Those familiar with this story know that Jesus had a plan all along. Other than that, Philip doesn't really get a mention, although there is one interesting theory surrounding him, and that's to do with his name. You see, the name Philip is not one you'd expect from an Aramaic laborer. Instead, it's a Greek name, and so many believe that he probably was bilingual. This would explain why, in some stories, Philip is often seen as an apostle to the local Greeks in the area. After the events of the Gospels, the Apostle Philip fades into the background, but many early apocryphal sources describe what happened to him afterwards, like the so-called Acts of Philip, which explore Philip's preaching activity across the various colonies of the Mediterranean. Others say he authored the controversial Gospel of Philip, a much later Gnostic text that outlined some of the core beliefs of this breakaway Christian sect. Banned biblical books aside, many histories conclude Philip's story in the city of Hierapolis, in modern-day Turkey. In the year 80 AD, a local Roman governor ordered Philip to be strung up and crucified. Despite this gruesome punishment, it is said that Philip continued to preach while hanging there, and even managed to gain some new converts in his final moments. In the centuries that followed, the ancient city of Hierapolis became a site of pilgrimage, and archaeologists have long tried to find the remains of this Christian saint. One breakthrough came in 2011, when a mysterious tomb was discovered with inscriptions linked to this disciple. What's more, they discovered several 6th century bread stamps that appeared to show the disciple Philip, an homage to his role during the feeding of the 5,000, and in the background you can see the same image of his tomb. Bartholomew. In the Duomo of Milan, you will find a sculpture of Saint Bartholomew. On the surface, it seems rather pleasant, a tall muscular man draped in a long flowing robe. But when you look closer, you'll realize that he's a little too muscular, and that his robe is a little too skin-like. Now, if you've watched a previous video of mine, perhaps you know what happened to this saint already. If you haven't, well, be warned. This disciple has the worst fate of them all. But first, the issue of this disciple's name. He is often called Bartholomew, which is a Greek form of Bar-Tolmai, Aramaic for son of Tolmai. But in the Gospel of John, he is known as Nathaniel. Perhaps then, his real name was Nathaniel bar Tolmai. Whatever he was called, this disciple does not feature too prominently in the Gospels. But there was an upside of this. It gave early Christians plenty of room to create one of the most gruesome legends in all of Christian history. According to the historian Eusebius of Caesarea, Bartholomew travelled to the lands of Armenia. While he was there, he converted the pagan king Polemius to Christianity. However, not everyone in the royal family was so keen to convert. This act enraged the king's brother, who ordered Bartholomew's torture and execution. The punishment? Bartholomew was flayed, meaning that his skin was removed from his body. This has led to some of the most horrendous pieces of Christian art I have ever seen, many of them depicting the saint carrying his own skin, as if draped in a loose sheet of clothing. These stories inspired this statue, sculpted by Marco de Agrate in 1562. Despite its ghoulish appearance, it is genuinely one of the greatest sculptures of its time, with carved musculature and intricate anatomical detail. Although Bartholomew seemed to have met a horrendous death, his suffering was not in vain. In the years after this apostle, Christianity maintained a foothold in Armenia. In fact, in the year 301, the kingdom officially adopted Christianity as the state religion, and in doing so, became the first Christian nation in history. No wonder why Bartholomew is the patron saint of the Armenian church. Oh, that and leatherworkers, Who says Christians don't have a sense of humour? Matthew. When the Roman Empire annexed the province of Judea, they extracted harsh taxation from the population and even hired local people to do their dirty work. That's where we meet Levi, a tax collector who was almost universally disliked. Except, of course, for Jesus, who curiously calls him to be one of the disciples. It's a scene that appears in another of Caravaggio's paintings, The Calling of St. Matthew. In a darkened room lit by a beam of light, we see a finely dressed man surrounded by fellow tax collectors. He appears to be pointing at himself in confusion, and that's when you notice the figure of Jesus in the corner, partially obscured by shadow. Despite his disreputable origins, Levi proves himself to be a loyal follower and is renamed Matthew, a name that means gift of God in Hebrew. Sadly, little else is said about Matthew in the biblical story, but according to later histories, he travelled south to the African kingdom of Ethiopia. This land already had strong links to the ancient Jewish religion, with kings that would later trace their lineage back to King Solomon. While in Ethiopia, Matthew preached the gospel and even converted the king's daughter, Iphigenia. Similar to the story of Bartholomew, this act enraged the king's brother, who ordered the death of the apostle while he was praying at an altar. Today, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church is considered to be one of the oldest Christian churches in existence, and even has its own biblical canon, which includes the apocryphal book of Enoch. In any case, the former tax collector Matthew is regarded as an apostle of this nation. Now, St. Matthew has another claim to fame: the Gospel of Matthew, one of the most important Christian texts in the Bible. Traditionally, it's believed that it was written by the disciple Matthew himself, who collected Jesus' sayings into one document. Nowadays, however, biblical scholars are a little more skeptical. Instead, it's believed that this text was written by an anonymous author around the year 80 AD. Although this gospel has some original material, it reworks parts of the Gospel of Mark and possibly another text known as the Q source, whose material also appears in the Gospel of Luke. This is all to say that the Gospel of Matthew was likely written by the second or third generations of Christians, those who did not know Jesus in person but had heard eyewitness accounts. It seems that in the following decades, the disciple Matthew's name was attached to this document. James the Lesser. Alright, I have a challenge for you. I suspect many watching this video are going to forget about this upcoming disciple, but I want you to remember him. But it's going to be hard. You see, this disciple is sadly a little forgettable. James, son of Alphaeus, is the second James among the disciples, and unfortunately, we don't know much about him. He only features in the lists of the 12 apostles, and nowhere else. And whenever Christian writers do talk about him, it's usually only to differentiate him from James the Greater. They'll often give him diminutive titles, like James the Minor, James the Lesser, or Little St. James. Despite his relative obscurity as a disciple, at least early Christian artists didn't forget to give him a gruesome death. Whenever the saint appears, he is often shown carrying a large club, the symbol of his martyrdom. Wait, who are we talking about again? Okay, moving on. Jude Thaddeus. When it comes to biblical names, it's safe to say that certain ones are a little tarnished. Such is the case with Jude, not to be confused with his counterpart, Judas Iscariot. As a result, this loyal disciple is sometimes referred to with another name, Thaddeus. Unfortunately, Jude Thaddeus does not feature prominently in the Gospels, if at all, but he may have a role elsewhere in the New Testament. You see, towards the end of the Bible, there is a very short letter known as the Epistle of Jude. It contains a warning that the Christian community is under threat. There are imposters in the church, those who claim to be moral but instead seek only to enrich themselves. The author then proceeds to quote biblical characters who demonstrated their faith. Curiously, one of the quotes he uses is from the Book of Enoch, that apocryphal writing which was banned from mainstream biblical canons. Of course, as with many on this list, there is a debate over whether Jude actually wrote this. After the events in the Gospels, Jude was said to travel around Western Asia. Many of these stories take him to Armenia, where he met with the disciple Bartholomew, and as we've seen, it was a pretty doomed mission. So no wonder that Jude is the patron saint of lost causes. While Jude was martyred in Armenia, the Christian community survived. In fact, the monastery of St. Jude Thaddeus stands to this day. The original building dates to the 3rd century, one of the oldest churches in existence. Simon the Zealot. We now arrive at the final disciple on this list. This figure is often depicted carrying a large saw. By this point in the video, I'm sure you can guess why. Anyway, Simon the Zealot is a rather curious figure among the disciples, and the word zealot is one of those biblical terms that has made it into English. But in its original context, the Zealots were a radical and violent political movement. As the Roman Empire governed Judea, the Zealots rose up and fought for the freedom of the Jewish people. Although little is known about Simon the Zealot, it's striking that a man with such revolutionary politics would be associated with Jesus. After all, while he was viewed as the Jewish Messiah and a descendant of King David, Jesus' message is generally one of peace. Perhaps then, Simon understood that the so-called King of the Jews was more interested in a different kind of kingdom. In the centuries that followed, Christian legends recount that Simon the Zealot travelled to Persia to spread the faith, and that's where this saw comes in. According to the apocryphal book, The Passion of Simon and Jude, the disciple was sawn in half by the locals. Although Simon seems to have renounced his violent ways, the Zealots would continue to fight against their oppressors, and the region erupted into all-out conflict. During the Jewish wars, the Romans destroyed the city of Jerusalem, as well as the sacred temple. It would be an event that would dramatically change the fate of Christianity forever, as many fled their homeland to establish churches across the Mediterranean. Across primary schools in England, there's a popular nursery rhyme to remember the 6 wives of Henry VIII, and it goes like this: divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. Now, I think the 12 disciples could do with such a handy rhyme, but I'm still trying to think of what goes with flayed alive by Armenians. I think it's fair to say that being a disciple of Jesus is a job with one of the highest mortality rates out there. Except, of course, if your name is John, the only disciple said to have been spared a brutal death. For the remaining 11, however, being a disciple often ended pretty badly. But maybe you're wondering at this point, why did the disciples all seem to suffer such excruciating fates? Well, there's actually a real historical reason for this, and it's here we turn to next. Throughout this video, you will have seen the various artworks of these disciples, often in their final moments. But despite their suffering, their facial expression is usually one of serene calm. And there is a reason for this. Since early Christianity, martyrdom was seen as a holy act. From the very beginning, the Roman elites were often nervous of Christians, especially as they refused to worship at the various imperial shrines. Christianity required its followers to renounce all other gods, and this included emperor worship. As you'd expect, Christians were treated with skepticism and distrust, which soon bubbled over into violence. We've seen how Nero blamed Christians for the fire of Rome, and in later years, emperors like Diocletian would order mass persecution and the destruction of church buildings. But despite the threat of being thrown to lions, many Christians did not renounce their faith, even in the face of certain death. Their martyrdoms were seen as witnesses to their unwavering loyalty, and such acts mirrored the bravery faced by their spiritual leader, Jesus, whose death is the central symbol of the religion. Fortunately, times have now changed, and this is not something that anyone should try to imitate. But it appears that early Christian writers and historians seem to have treated martyrdom as a template for Christian devotion. And before long, almost all the stories of the saints were stories of martyrdoms, and of course, this included the disciples of Jesus. Over time, stories emerged of their bravery in the face of cruelty, all in service of their faith. And that's why, when you look at these paintings, there's a feeling of serenity blended with suffering. The 12 disciples, give or take, would lay the foundations of Christianity, the largest religion in world history. Their stories give us glimpses into the lives of the historical figures they represent, but also into the world of early Christianity and the people behind the New Testament writings. Now we've made it to the end of this video, it's time I come clean with you. I've only revealed half of this story. There are other texts out there, lost books that were allegedly written by the disciples, like the infamous Gospel of Judas, known as the Gnostics. They represent the earliest heresy in the history of Christianity. To learn what happens next in the story, you'll have to watch here to find out more. Hey, thanks for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this one. If you liked this video and want to see more, why not subscribe? A like and a comment also go a really long way. Right now is a very special time for the channel. As of this recording, Hochelaga is just about to reach 1 million subscribers. It's one of those milestones that anyone who makes YouTube videos only dreams of. And even now, it's hard for me to visualize big numbers like this. But the thought that 1 million people have enjoyed my content enough to stick around is truly humbling. Ever since I started making videos during the pandemic, there's one question I get again and again. What does Hochelaga mean? Well, on one level, it's the name of a neighborhood in Montreal, Canada, that I once visited and simply liked the way it sounded. But there's another answer. I've always thought of this channel as a kind of museum. Each video is an exhibit, something I'm interested in and wanted to share with you. Whether it's biblical mythology, strange art, or something truly random, each exhibit is made with the same care and joy of the craft. As for me, I'm happy being this place's humble curator, and it's been great to see so many of you wander through the exhibits. Reading your interesting, funny, and supportive comments makes me feel like I've built something truly special. So, to viewers past and present, thank you. Here's to many more. Anyway, I look forward to seeing you next time. Goodbye.